Freedom of speech, very important, very topical, always has been for a long time at least. It's not just about the free exchange of ideas. It's not just about me having an opinion and you having an opinion and we somehow exactly understand each other's opinion and come up with the truth. We can't work out what words mean unless we present ourselves into a language game, into society, and try using them. If you come to my country and you try saying football, it doesn't mean what you think it means if you're from Europe or South America. It means the game that we play. In Australia, you come here and you say soccer, and that's what you mean. But you won't work that out until you get here. So you should be able to say football or soccer or try it on for size, and then you'll work out what your words mean. And this is the same for a great many things. Some people somewhere, however, seem to believe that the lexicographers, the people that write dictionaries, create meaning. They don't. They interpret it. We create it. I say Gamergate, and then I tell you about it, and that's what I mean. And the lexicographer observes me, observes you, observes everyone that says Gamergate, finds out what it was, and then just interprets our meaning into the dictionary, and the lexicographer has no control over what the word Gamergate means. They have to wait for us to define it for them just so they can interpret it. They're no more than like a Hansard reporter in the court, you know? And I don't use the example of Gamergate lightly. That, in my opinion, the way that I remember the culture wars is that it started in my country with Julia Gillard, the first female prime minister, and feminism, and people like Clementine Ford and Van Badham, and even a lady called Charlotte Dawson, who's since passed away. But people like that being very vocal, and they were mostly left-wing and mostly something like feminist. And the thing that I remember pushing back that was originally in some circles heroic, but eventually I think developed into the pro-Trump movement was Gamergate. And it was essentially gamers saying, let us form our own communities, let us have our own preferences and our own desires and use our own words and make our own friends and our own meanings and our own traditions and customs within our community and do not socially engineer for us. In fact, I think Gamergate is one of the clearest examples of A, an activist group, and B, a corporation trying to socially engineer 100 million strong community. I mean, the gaming community is massive. But it's also B, something where the community won and the corporations were defeated and the activists were defeated, which doesn't always happen. So let's take a look at it. And I want to take a look at it in a very recent context because abc.net.au, a website down under here, our government media channel, has just done an interview that I want to bring to your attention.
So that's Gamergate, but alongside these issues of the treatment of women in the gaming world, there are issues of women and more broadly issues of gender in the games themselves. How should we treat gender in games? Should it be something incidental, devoid of any real significance in the world of the game? Or should games perhaps create environments where it's really important, where gender issues can be tackled head-on and strategies for gender justice be sort of road-tested?
So I get that this guy's just asking a question. He's an interviewer, but it staggers me how badly he gets this wrong. The idea that a game is how we're going to road test how society might work better. Why would anyone escape the hardships of work or school or bullying at school or whatever, run home and put on a game and want to be lectured to by a bunch of social justice, social engineering feminists who want to say the world that you live in isn't good enough. We're going to make one that we think is more just. Now, it's true that a game, like Doom, you're fighting demons that are pouring through a portal on Mars at a space research center or whatever it is, and you're the last guy with the BFG 9000. Clearly, that's not how the world is. But you're escaping into something fun, something where you're heroic, something where you can just kill without any sort of moral right or wrong. And we'll get more into that right now. But everyone always said Gamergate was just about abusing women. But what this guy still doesn't get is that someone wanted to take this whole world, like World of Warcraft is literally a whole world, and say, we need the 0.1% of the population that has the sorts of beliefs that gender equality advocates, at the really extreme end, and say, we must use these games as some experiment to indoctrinate mostly young people, but some older people as well, as how to live better or how to speak better or how to have opinions about gender which they think is better. This is so wrong-headed, no one's going to like it, and it's exactly the sort of thing that everyone's rebelling against. I still think the world's slow to catch up on. This is the problem that we're having with a lot of the culture war conflict. But let's listen further.
And if we like this idea of gaming as an ethical activity, does that mean that acting unethically in the world of the game should carry the same moral weight as acting unethically in the quote-unquote real world?
Well, can one act unethically in a game? Is that even possible? One of the things that these people that are trying to change gaming don't understand is that if, let's say, Donald Trump, Chairman Mao, Stalin, and Hitler all got in a room together, they would fight, right? But if they played Snakes and Ladders or Hungry Hungry Hippos or something, they might put aside their politics, put aside their ethics, and just adopt the game's very simple, very stupid little outcome of the Hungry Hungry Hippos eating all the white balls, and they might start to have fun together. So there's important qualities of a game. Number one, there has to be rules that everyone follows. The second quality is that it has to be fun. Everyone has to want to enjoy it. Number three is there has to be some sort of skill involved, which I think that Snakes and Ladders doesn't necessarily qualify at. But most importantly, number four is that there can't be any political or moral, ethical outcome. Like when you're playing the blue team and you're capturing the red flag, or you're playing the red team and you capture the blue flag, capturing the blue or red flag doesn't mean you support or don't support abortion, or it doesn't mean that you support Israel or Palestine, or it doesn't mean you're for or against the Republican or the Democrat Party. So like I said, in Doom, you're just killing aliens, or demons, excuse me. It's just no ethical claim there at all. So gaming doesn't want ethics in it, and that's why people are friendly, and that's why friends form and communities form in gaming, and that's what the gamers are trying to do. Say, let's leave your ethics out of it. Now, the funny thing is, though, ethics can form within a game. If we play 10,000 hours on World of Warcraft, we might eventually work out that you just ditching out of the game halfway through when you're the healer on a dungeon is really bad form. That we do develop, maybe not ethics, but manners within a game. But for that to happen, the game has to be allowed to flow and form freely, and for people to work this out on their own. In the same way that the word PWNED, pwned, was supposed to be owned, but P and O was next to each other, so that just formed freely and it became part of the vernacular. And this is how manners, traditions, and perhaps even ethics within games should form, not because communities of feminists should try and tell us what we should all think.
Stephanie Rennick is a research associate in philosophy at the University of Glasgow, and she's been doing some very interesting work on gender in video games that involves examining the kinds of gender-related tropes that games employ and the ways that gender operates in gaming dialogue.
So here we go. Let's do a big analysis of the use of language and gender in games and see where Stephanie's going to take us. Here she is.
Sometimes there are conversations with particular choice structures. So if I were to be asked a question and answer one way, I might get a certain response. If I were to answer a different way, I might get a different response. So there are structurally quite a lot of things going on like we would expect to see in everyday life. Computer games have gotten really quite complicated, and we can see really quite complex and rich dialogue in there. So in the roughly 40 games we've got in the corpus, we've got more than 2 million words of dialogue. So it gives you a sense of just how much talking people are doing.
And costume change, yes, it's another day. But you can see the point she's getting at. Take all the games you can, download all the words spoken, map whether the words are spoken by a male or female, define the words as heroic or cowardly or emotional or logical or reasoned, map whether the male said it or the female said it, and then cry sexism. And I'll cut straight to the end of the interview. You can guess, I'm sure, but you can understand what her conclusion is going to be. But let's hear her say it.
Consider deciding on the gender of a character later in their development, after you've decided on their occupation and personality. So try doing it randomly. Ask yourself things like, does the person doing the emotional labor need to be a woman? Do all the hundreds of enemies you mow down need to be men? But I think if there was one lesson developers could learn from the data we've got so far, is this. Why don't women talk more in video games? And they don't. They don't talk nearly as much as men most of the time because there's not enough of them talking. So the number one thing is just have more female characters. That's not going to solve all the problems, but it's a solid first step.
I love the bit about have like more women mowing them down as they run at you. Just imagine playing a Second World War video game and like you're behind a machine gun and then the Nazis run at you and they've all got like swastikas and death's heads and blonde ponytails and big boobs and fucking, I don't know, some Lorna Jane activewear, and you're just gunning for headshots and just like taking the women. Like you couldn't. The point of a game is that you have like willing suspension of disbelief, just like in a movie. Like you're like, wow, it's ridiculous that I've killed 1,000 people and I haven't even taken a shot to the head yet. But I'll suspend that disbelief because I'm having so much fun in this game. Oh look, platoon of females. Now they're all dead. Now I feel good about myself. I'm winning the war. I mean, you'd never pull that shit off.
And yeah, there's probably more men speaking in video games, but like seriously, the market is male. Video games started in the 70s, and for some reason girls didn't jump in. They were perfectly liberated by then. You sit in your bedroom with a computer or eventually with an internet connection. How do you exclude half the population from that? You can't. Didn't seem to join in. Most of the market was males, so they pitch games at males. Don't really see how that's a problem. So most of the people doing the dialogue are male because I identify better with a male, believe it or not, because I am one.
So we're building what linguists call a corpus, which is essentially a database of video game dialogue, because it allows us to run automatic testing. So it allows us to automatically count the number of words or lines spoken by particular characters, to do statistical analysis.
Right, so measuring words and a computer taking them out of context and not being able to pick up on sarcasm or humor or something, and determining whether or not, undoubtedly, it's going to be sexist or racist or something like that. But that's bad, but it's about to get a whole bunch worse when you listen to the rest of it.
But we also want to create a shareable resource, because that's one of the problems with studying games, is that whereas there are corpora for films and for TV, there are fewer, especially big ones, for video games. And that's because video game scripts are proprietary data. They belong to the game companies. So if we extracted the dialogue from the game code, we wouldn't be able to share it.
So it's not just like the words spoken in the game. I wonder what words they're recording then.
So instead, what we're doing is using fan scripts. And these are like transcripts that people who play the game put hundreds of hours and loads of effort into producing, and then they release them online.
So it's going to be you. It's going to be the words that you write, the things that you put on some webpage or Reddit or wherever you post your fan script. Things that you say will be deemed sexist. But of course, there will be feminists writing fan scripts as well. And they'll get a very high rating, and they'll get a green tick of approval, and they'll get a blue ribbon prize and a gold star, and their fan script will be politically correct and yours won't be. But it gets worse. It's not just the characters that you're going to be sexist for putting words in the mouth of.
Sometimes the character in question is not the sort of thing we would usually assign gender to, like a talking book, but players treat that character as if they have a gender.
So when you get in trouble for making disparaging comments about someone, that someone could actually be, I don't know, like a feather duster or a globe or a book, light globe, microphone. But whatever it is, you can be in trouble for saying the bad thing about an object. They just have to, and it'll be them that's assigning the gender to it as well. You can be sure of that.
That gender representation in games perpetuates existing injustice.
And it should. Like, this is the sort of thing that this lady says that makes me think she really misses the point. If you see the way that the world operates currently as unjust, then when you make a game that you can enter into and seamlessly participate in, so you can willingly suspend disbelief and become a hero in a piece of conflict, in a struggle that after respawning 100 times you eventually prevail in, you enter the game easier if the world around you looks just like the world literally around you. So if you see sexism in the world, there should be sexism in the game. Now, there's a caveat to that, because you could enter a game in which up is down and black is white, and the experience of the game could be great because it's exactly not like the world. And it's an extreme example. Perhaps dogs could meow and cats could bark or something, and there would be an amount of humor or absurdism in that. In which case, it has to be hugely absurd. Some subtle little thing where the president's female, that's not going to count it. Something where the alleged gender pay gap is gone, and that's not going to cut it either. I really don't think she gets this point. The point of the game is it's supposed to look like the world so you can enter it, or it's supposed to be so fucking crazy and absurd and set on a spaceship with time travel and stuff like that, that the reality of the world doesn't matter. Thus, feminism isn't ever going to be able to insert its like realistic gender politics into any sort of game because it's the wrong medium to do it in.
Research hasn't been able to be done in the same sort of way. So if we think, as I do, that tropes shape our expectations, that is, like if a pattern recurs often enough, we come to expect it, then we can see that subverting or averting pernicious tropes, things like damsels in distress or men being expendable, is a way to disrupt and challenge those expectations.
Are they tropes or are they archetypes, though? The idea of the trope that we are just a blank canvas and we have there's no realistic expectation nor any predetermined biological reality as to which gender is the most emotional, which gender has the most courage or fortitude or pragmatism or whatever quality you might want to put to it, until some powerful social manipulator or social engineer comes along and makes the men brave and the women emotional. And for no other reason than that, we think women are emotional. Maybe. But this shit is 100,000 years old right now. I've said before on my channel that there's proof that 80% of males across all cultures and all times never mated, repeated in many, many, many different games. The guys didn't get to produce offspring. And that's undeniable facts. All those females seem to have the same opinion that only 20% of men are attractive and 80% aren't. And that seems, to me, really good conclusive proof that across all times and all cultures, there was one idea that was always present in females forever. But then that leads us to the idea that we actually have archetypes, that something like the warrior, the male, that was just so full of courage and brave and almost foolhardy ability to rush out and define himself by doing war, or was it the hero archetype who was just an everyman who overcame his fear and crossed over into the darkness and found there something of value that he brought back to the village? Or is it the wizard archetype, the human being that made a great study of a thing and separated himself from a society, living in either a tall tower or a remote cave somewhere, so thus the distance from the noise of the court and of the common people made him see more clearly? These are role archetypes. Can we produce video games where you just take, whatever sort of crazy human you want and just say, they are the king, they are the warrior, they are the one that saves us all? And will we believe it or not if it's not what we see every day? Or does it have to be that, does the warrior have to be a muscular, large male who is aggressive? Does the king have to be old and bitter and morose and heartbroken because of all the horrible decisions he's made? And does the wizard have to be aged and eccentric and weird? Because when you take an understudy of something like science for 50 years, you end up a bit that way. Obviously, there are some things like trope, like why does the president have to be white? The president doesn't have to be white. The president could very well be black. So if we always show the president as white, that's a little tropey. But I think she's not giving due credit to archetypes in this one. And games simply won't work, I think, without archetypes, because stories speak to us. And there's a difference between a good story and a bad story. Look at the end of Chamber of Secrets, right? Harry Potter literally goes into a dungeon without a weapon, receives a magic sword from a wizard, saves a damsel, and dies and is reborn. Like, that's literally what happens down there. And then those books were so popular,
I think the stories we tell through games could be aspirational. They could show the world as better as it really is, or they could shine a light on how it really is. But unfortunately, in many of them, women are silenced or backgrounded. And if you're genderqueer, non-binary, or agender, then you just might not feature at all. And obviously, it's not just gender that matters. What's interesting about our research is that the materials we produce, the data set we produce, could be used by other researchers to investigate how race or sexuality or disability or class or age is depicted in games as well.
Yes, I admitted I just left that last bit in about race, age, gender, and that sort of stuff to piss you off a little bit. But to the former point about games could be aspirational, like we have a game where at the beginning we are of one mindset and it changes your mindset on social justice by the end to make the world a more just and wonderful place. Fuck that. I mean, look at Grand Theft Auto 5. That's the highest selling game of all time. That game made more money than the top 3 movies, than Endgame, Avatar, and Titanic put together. I mean, that game sold a lot. Everyone in that game is a piece of shit. There's almost nothing aspirational about that, to the point in time that it's funny, like it's hilarious, that game, just how terrible every human being, except Franklin, is in that game. But that's what appeals to us. I mean, if you make a game in which shiny, happy people are succeeding and winning all the time, and there's no tragedy and there's no loss, and people don't play it. Like the Resident Evil games are full of, quite frankly, torture and dismemberment, and people love those games. In fact, the whole idea of aspirational games, what's the end in mind? Most people play a game to overcome some sort of conflict, that there's something wrong, but the hero prevails and succeeds. And in all the aforementioned games that I just mentioned, those are the storylines. But an aspirational game, like somehow poverty is alleviated, or I don't know, like there's a female president at the end of it or something like that, that shit won't sell.
One possibility that some games explore is to treat gender in games as purely aesthetic, to have it be incidental, to have a man and woman just be treated the same. And we see games that don't do that. So one of the games in the corpus has, if you play as a male character or if you play as a female character, the other characters in the game treat you differently. So if you're a man and you go into a restaurant, you're offered pasta. If you're a woman, you're given salad. If you're a man, beer. If you're a woman, wine. One of the characters describes the male as energetic and the woman as beautiful. And when this happens systematically through a game, it raises some eyebrows, I think, or it should.
All right, so my major point throughout this video has been that I just don't want to buy into her bullshit that you leave games as just pure escapism, it should reflect reality, or it should be absolutely absurd. But either way, you're willing to suspend disbelief and you overcome a conflict and have some fun. But just to buy into her bullshit here for a second, see, this is a really good point about where she's going with this. As a 6 foot, 95 kilo strong male who, whatever, I have a certain set of experiences. My wife, who's nearly a foot shorter than me and, like 40 kilos lighter than me, she has a different set of experiences. She really does order different food from me. She really does have different drinks from me. And certainly she has different experiences walking in a car park at night and things like that. Are we to make games where the male and female experience is the same? That's not how the reality of the world is. Why would she enjoy a game where walking through a car park, she's like whistling a tune and headphones on and doesn't really care? That's not been her experience. But listen to what she says next.
But there are games that don't do that at all, that instead say, nope, you can have the same background, you can have the same role in the narrative, no matter whether you're a man or a woman. And I think there's a sense in which that can seem really aspirational. It's treating gender as no barrier to doing the sorts of amazing feats that the heroes go on to do. The flip side to that, of course, is that it might stop us telling certain kinds of stories that reflect experiences distinctive to particular groups, like gender-based oppression, for instance, or toxic masculinity or something.
So she seems to take my point that having two storylines, one that is masculine and one that is feminine, because we have different experiences in the world, is a good idea. Now, she's taking that position because she's going to bang on about sexism and shit soon. I'm taking that position because the female immerses herself more in the game, whereas the man might immerse himself more in the game when there's a masculine storyline or something like that. I just can't believe she chose toxic masculinity, well, I can believe, and gender-based oppression as the quintessential female experiences. But anyway, let's keep listening.
And so my instinct is that diversity of stories is the answer here. In philosophy, we're often looking for the one truth. But actually, I think that in fiction, we can depict many ways the world could be, right? There are various ways to subvert and avert the tired tropes. My hope is that by helping to shine a light on some of the existing patterns, that then creators, much more imaginative people than me, can go on to transcend them.
See, this is where the paradox in this gets revealed. If I go into a restaurant and they automatically offer me a beer, and she goes into the restaurant and they automatically offer her a glass of wine, and I put it into a video game so people think, it's just like real life. That happens to me and my wife all the time, and we have to swap and blah, blah, blah. They get the joke and that sort of stuff. If she's going to call that a trope and say that it shouldn't be entered into the game, okay, that's one thing. But she's then saying like a woman walks down the road and gets wolf whistled or catcalled or something like that, or she gets spoken over at a meeting, and we must put that in games because that's real life and that's the things that women experience. Don't they also experience getting a glass of wine? She's just talking about a different sort of trope. You can't say let's not include real life in games, period. She's saying get rid of the parts of real life that she doesn't like and put in the parts of life that she wants to like. And then that comes down to mere preference. And that isn't justice. And that's not what she's talking about. The reality is, I'm led to believe, women get offered salads and men get offered a burger or whatever it was she said. The reality is men don't get catcalled on the street, women do. You can't say one's in, but leave the other one out. That is down to mere aesthetics and preference and thus excludes justice. And it leaves the game developers with nowhere to go except, as I've already said, a game that is completely morally unambiguous, in which there's space aliens and space marines, or there's just red team capture blue flag, blue team capture red flag, which is what we always end up back at anyway. So I think our project's doomed to fail. In conclusion, you come home from a shitty day at work or a bad day at school getting bullied all day and you want to escape into something. It is a privilege and it's amazing. It's a miracle they're even allowed to do that. Movies are good, books are good, but games are better. However, what is the magic that goes into making this escapism into a game possible? You need to be able to either have something that is exactly like your world, that you can say, I am in this world, and it's got all I know how all the light switches and the traffic rules and everything work, but this time I'm going to be the hero and I'm going to win. And that's a wonderful moment for a young boy or girl who's going to become the hero. Or you just want to completely escape into like some steampunk castle in the clouds where like there's a weird cult of people living there and you have to get your daughter back, like BioShock 2 or something like that. And it's like everything's possible because it's so crazy. It needs to be morally unambiguous, or it needs to be just completely morally neutral. You need to have fun, and there needs to be a community there to play with it. Give us that, and you get gamers. You get people that escape into a game. Give us that, you get a community. Give us a community, you get language. Give us language, you get meaning. And from there, we might solve some of the social problems in the world, like racism and sexism and things which are real. But first comes the escapism, the game, the community, and that requires the moral unambiguity, the moral neutrality. What destroys it all? Gender politics. That's why the gamers were upset. That's why the gamers were upset in Gamergate. They knew that their community was going to solve a lot of social problems, as well as having a lot of fun, as well as making life enjoyable and meaningful. It was under attack from this stupid fucking thing. Couldn't understand that it injecting its gender politics into the act of escapism was going to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. And it had a lot of corporate support and the media was shit over it. It still seems to be going on right now. We need to learn these lessons. And I'm going to say again, the world is taking a long time to understand. Give people the freedom to speak how they want, to think how they want, and to form the communities that they want. And that's the only way for the communities to find solutions to their social and communal problems together as one. All right, guys, I know it's been a long video. Thanks for listening. I'll have another one shortly. Bye now.